Good morning. Welcome everyone. I'm Councillor Steve Pitt. I'm the leader of Portsmouth City Council and I'll be chairing this meeting. A bit of housekeeping before we get going. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room of public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble in the turning circle at the end of King Henry Street past the Park building. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust fire marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. Everyone speaking via microphone will be recorded and broadcast on the website, including those making deputations. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly they do not wish to be recorded. Please can everyone use the microphones and remember to switch them off when they've finished. We've read the report, but I will ask James shortly to introduce it. We have no deputations that I'm aware of today. Anna, is that correct? No. No deputations at all. No. Any apologies? I've got apologies from Councillor Ian Holder and Councillor Kimberly Barrett. Councillor Sanders.
Apologies from Councillor Gerald Vernon Jackson.
Thank you. Declarations of interest, members? None. Thank you. In that case, just for anyone watching online, Tom Southall, who's the project lead on Tipner West, has had a family emergency this morning and is unable to join us, but the report will be presented by James Fitzgerald in his stead. James, over to you. Oh, hang on a second. My fault. We haven't gone around the room and introduced ourselves. I was being a bit previous. So on my left, we have
Peter Bob, City Solicitor.
Natalie Brommer-Pearl, Chief Executive.
Anna Martin, Democratic Services.
Chris Ward, Director of Finance.
James Fitzgerald, Assistant Director of Finance.
Councillor Hugh Mason, Cabinet Lead for Planning Policy.
Susie Horton, Cabinet Member for Children, Families and Education.
Darren Sanders, Cabinet Member for Housing and Tackling Homelessness.
Yeah, I'm Councillor Lee Hunt and I am the Cabinet Member for Resources. My ward also covers Tipner, North End, Buckland and Stamshaw.
Matthew Willington, Cabinet Member for Community Wellbeing, Health and Care.
Dave Ashmore, Environmental Services.
and we have been now joined by
the late Gerald Vernon Jackson.
Sorry, Gerald, it's not a fault.
Cabinet Member for Transport.
Thank you very much.
And Councillor for Milton and Eastney.
Thank you. Right, now we've done the formalities, over to James Fitzgerald.
Thanks, Councillor Pitt. So just very briefly to introduce the report, hopefully members have had a chance to read it. So it builds on the recent reports to Cabinet and Council, and hopefully members will be aware of a lot of the progress that's been made recently. And the report itself reflects the updates that we've given to all parties actually in the various briefing meetings we've had over the last couple of weeks. I think just to pull out where we are at the moment, originally it was hoped that a decision could be made on a preferred option to be able to start detailed master planning. But reflecting on discussions at the last set of meetings, it's felt there's three main outstanding issues that need to be resolved before we can get towards a preferred option before something emerges. And the three matters are sort of viability. So I think we're all aware that there's a viability gap still. We're still at a high level in viability. But one of the recommendations in the report is that we go back and engage with government for additional funding opportunities. Stakeholder engagement, obviously very important, as it has been all the way throughout the project. And also on the IROPE situation. So we have to make sure that there's imperative reasons of overriding public interest for the option chosen, and it's felt that that can only be completed once the full scope of the project's been agreed. So in summary, we're looking to progress matters that are common to both remaining land use options, and the plan is to bring that back to a future meeting of Cabinet. So I think I'll sort of leave that there.
Thanks, James. Just a little bit of additional context there. The whole process around this requires us, in order to go through the Habitats Regulation Assessment process, to have explored everything within the principles laid down by full council and the overarching objective that we also set for the project. And at the moment, and because we're not meeting the requirement to minimise costs of the council, because it's not clear which option does that at this point at least, or whether there's a hybrid of the two that does, we need certainty around that, and there's more work to be done. Members, any comments or questions? Darren?
Just a question for James, really. We've been told that the preference by several people, the preference is to do nothing and just leave it as it is. Is there a financial impact? Is that viable? If it's not viable, what is the cost of doing nothing?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Sanders. I think it says in the report that nothing was agreed as an option that we wouldn't go forward with as a council. But I think there's flood defence works that could cost up to 36 million. And also, at the moment, we've spent about 23 million of the Citadel grant. So there is a risk that if we didn't achieve the outputs for Citadel, that government may ask for the funding back. So there is a considerable cost to do nothing. So
we're looking at least 60, I mean, given the construction market is rubbish at the moment, we're looking at least £60 million we would just have to basically flush down the toilet if we did nothing.
Well, yes, so we'd spend 36 million as the costs are estimated at the moment on flood defences, so that would be an outcome of it. But yeah, I mean, there's a risk of up to 60 million on costs that we know at the moment.
Thank you, James. That's all I had, Steve.
Just to point out, it's important to note that the 23 million in total represents a risk, but not necessarily that £23 million is at risk. We don't know. That's one of the reasons why there's a recommendation in there to go and discuss it with the government, because we believe that we've done everything in good faith. We want to know what their thoughts are 10 years after this was agreed in the first place, where the world has changed very considerably, particularly around environmental issues. Members, any other questions or comments? Lee?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I was around when we did the city deal and the agreement. Gerald was about at the same time, wasn't it? And everybody's very excited about it all, of course. And then since then, it's kind of been bogged down in a quagmire of politics, with people manoeuvring to their own advantage, and it's held it up and everything. Then we've had COVID and the cost of living crisis, which is sending the price of everything that's needed to build homes upwards. I believe a pallet of bricks has even doubled in that time. So the costs are very different to what they were when we were looking at the city deal. So it's right that we take a little bit of time on this. But I have to say, people across Stamshire and Tipner and Hillsea, they really need, because we've mentioned the sea defences this morning, it really is just so important that those sea defences get built. And we know, as I understand it anyway, the funding to do that comes from the delivery of the city deal, to make sure that we get on with that. And everywhere else around the city is being protected. And the people in that part of the city, they too need their sea defences. And I find it extraordinary that sometimes even the greenest of people who want to preserve their land for nature, and we want to get 10% biodiversity gain out of this, so that is also being looked at all of the time. But they are some of the people who have caused some of the biggest problems around this, including, I'm afraid, the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Trust. I'm not taking a swipe at them, but they really need to understand that we need to get on with this, because we don't, the sea's going to come in and sweep over the land anyway, and they're going to lose the very thing that they say that they are fighting for. And of course, we've all seen the projections of the flooding across North Stamshire, Tipner, so into Tipner Lane, into Range Green, and into all those houses in Tipner will come seawater, unless we get on with it. And I would like to see it make faster progress even than this. Although I have to say to you, Leader, that you've done a really good job bringing the other parties and groups into some sort of agreement. but the sooner that they all understand, I think they're coming to understand more and more the consequences of delay. And as I say, I represent that area along with Leo Madden and Jason Fazackerley, and the councillors there have always been in support of getting on with it. We have delivered to the council, and the residents in that area have delivered rather, without any, not much complaint at all really, all those houses in Tipner East. So we're getting on with building houses here, you know, and giving planning permission for homes. It's not so we're holding them up. And I get a bit peeved when I see people around the country saying, oh, councils don't want to build homes and everything. Here and over at Eastleigh, another Liberal Democrat council, we're getting on with building homes. It's the two major parties that don't want to do it, despite what Mr. Starmer says. And I'm utterly astonished that there's no opposition members from any of the groups here this morning to have a view or a say on this, and I think that's just awful. I don't suppose anybody can report on it, but we see a trend of this, don't we? They just don't show up for diddly squat, quite frankly. So it's a great shame. They should be taking part in this process. All I can assume is that they completely agree with everything that you've been saying when you're in talks with them. So I'm very grateful for that. But as I say, the last thing I want to say is the sea defences around the foreshore, Stamshore and around Tipner are as important as anywhere else, and they're in a shoddy state of repair right now. So we need to get on with something before something dreadful happens at any time. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Lee. Anyone else? Hugh?
3 questions, 2 comments. Section 7 is one of the first places where you mention Horsey Island East. Could you say whether what we devise on for Horsey Island East will have a knock-on effect on what we can do on Tipner West? Question 1. Question 2, in 814, you note that costs will become, because surveys will become time expired. When do they become time expired? How much time have we got? Question 3, 482, you make reference to the biodiversity net gain. Last week, the government gave some guidance to local authorities on biodiversity net gain. Are there any implications for that on our developments at Tipner or Horsey Island East? And 2 comments. Firstly, I would underline what my colleague, Councillor Hunt, has just said about the state of the sea defences. They are in a very parlous state, and whatever happens, we must get on with dealing with the sea defences. And if they're not going to be paid for out of this development, we're going to have to find the money from somewhere else. And my last comment is a pedantic one. In section 410, I assume we apprised the government rather than appraised them, although I would like to appraise government and find them wanting. Thank you.
James?
First question was the link between what is proposed on Horsey Island East and what is proposed on Tipner. Do they have implications for each other?
I think certainly from the financial point of view, anything on Horsey Island East would cost a huge amount of money because of having to put a proper bridge link in there. So, and not being the expert on this, but Horsey Island East is being used as the compensation land if there's building done on the SPA on Tipner. So sort of they are linked, but does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks. I think that's something which is important to get out, that there is the possibility of using Horsey Island East as compensation land. Yeah.
And the next one was about
time expiry.
Yeah, so that's something we're sort of looking quite hard at the moment. One of the things we're trying to do is to keep the momentum up in the project, so that we avoid that. I think what we're trying to do at the moment is just to carry on doing work that's concurrent with both options to avoid any abortive costs wherever possible.
But is this a question of weeks or months or longer?
It's more months than weeks.
Thank you. And the government's on BNG last week, does that have any implications?
I'm afraid I really couldn't answer that at the moment. We can follow that up if you'd like us to.
Okay, I'd like to follow that one up.
Matthew.
Thank you. I'll just keep it very brief and just really drawing attention, as some others have, the Director of Finance comments in Section 8. And I think Councillor Horton and I were at the National Children's and Adult Services Conference last week, and we were amongst many colleagues from around the country who are in their social care budgets, adults and children's, having tens of £1 million worth of savings that they are having to make because they are not their councils are in such a parlous financial state. Therefore, what we see in 8, which is all about taking moving things forward, as James has just been mentioned, but also doing things in a systematic, sensible way in terms of finance, looking to make sure we try and get as much money as we can out of government, reappraising ourselves to make sure that any viability gap is the bare minimum, and making sure that we do not have to pay back any parts of the city deal, is absolutely critical to the financial health of this council. We have seen other councils who have made rash decisions, poor decisions, and sometimes decisions, as has already been mentioned, many years ago when the financial situation was very different, that are now coming home to roost now in their general council finances, which is meaning, one, that they're having to cut services, but also they're having to stop investing. And if you stop investing in things, that can have negative consequences in the future, because if you invest in something that's going to save you money, but you haven't got any money to do that, then you are going to have more on costs, which is where you get things like massive pressures on essential services and non-essential services that you want to achieve for the best well-being of your authority area. So I think this is a very sensible, systematic approach, and I completely back the paper.
Thank you, Matt. I'm going to do something that's quite slightly unusual. I'm going to actually read 2 bits from the report out loud, so they're on the public record in this meeting. And one of them is 4.8.2, which is about stakeholder engagement, because we've talked a lot about the viability stuff this morning, but the stakeholder engagement stuff's probably, for me, the most important part of all of this, and it is around the environmental issue. So both options that are currently on the table include direct effects, adverse effects to the SPA Ramsar, which are the names given to the protected European sites, and therefore are likely to result in a negative assessment of the implications of this important site. The development proposal and the plan policy giving effect can therefore only be carried out through the process of derogation. This includes that there are no alternative solutions that would avoid that harm, and that the harm is fully compensated for. To pass this test, the project will need to deliver compensation that ensures that the damage to the European sites which will or could be caused will be fully offset and provided prior to any impact taking place. The compensatory measures must ensure the resilience of the network of European sites as a whole, even despite a negative effect on an individual European site. The judgment as to compliance with these tests is complex and requires consultation with Natural England as the appropriate statutory nature conservation body, but will be ultimately decided upon by the statutory planning authority or the planning inspectorate. Further work is therefore required with Natural England alongside the other regulators and nature conservation bodies to inform these matters. I think it's really important that everyone understands that there isn't a option that doesn't impact nature and an option that does. They both do, and both of them are bound by a very tight regulatory process that says how at the end of actually before the scheme starts development, and then the overall outcome is of overall benefit to the network of European sites. That's enshrined in law, so it is impossible in law for this scheme to go forward and overall deliver net harm. And I think that's something that sometimes gets lost in our discussions, but it's extremely important. And in 8.7, the reason why we're doing the next piece of work to minimise costs and impact on City Council finance and services to the public, which was, remember, one of the principles that we agreed, it is clear that as part of the detailed financial model, the Council will need to design a scheme that, one, maximises the opportunity for additional external funding, because that's always going to be necessary, whatever scheme comes through. Optimises the revenues that can be generated from the scheme through the sale of service land parcels, that's obviously about working with others, and continues to value engineer costs while seeking to maintain the proposed principles set out in appendices B and C of this report, which were the ones that were agreed by full council in the instance of the set of principles and the overarching objective which we're updating today. So I know it's slightly unusual to take time up by reading those two out, but I'm aware that this meeting's being streamed, and therefore wanted to make sure that anyone watching it back is very, very clear that wherever we end up, we will make sure that there is overall full compensation and the sum for any harm that is caused to any natural resources as part of this. Members, any other questions, comments? Thanks to James for stepping into the breach today at very, very short notice. Are we happy then? We've got to be very specific here that there are 6 recommendations noted in the report. Do we accept all 6 recommendations as posted? We do. Okay, thank you very much indeed. In that case, please note that, Anna, and that concludes today's meeting.